Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Asher Marketing Podcast. This podcast is brought to you by Asher Agency, a full-service marketing agency with offices in Indiana, West Virginia, and Washington, D.C. For nearly 50 years, Asher has helped our clients tell their stories, reach customers and prospects, and stand out from the crowd. To learn more about how we can help your company, visit asheragency.com or contact us at hello@asheragency.com. My guest is Steve Christensen with the Responsible Battery Coalition. Steve, how are you doing?
Good, Anthony. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you for having me. It's great to be on with you.
Well, I really appreciate the opportunity to talk. I'm eager to hear more about the coalition's work and your role. But I want to start a little bit further back in history with your career path. You have a very interesting career path. And I'd like to hear your thoughts on what you had originally were thinking of in terms of career opportunities and how and when you pivoted from that, if you pivoted at all. You began as a student at UC Riverside, if I'm not mistaken. What was your career plan at that point? And where did you go from there? And how did you pivot from that point?
I wanted to work in politics and public policy somehow. There's people call it luck. I just call it opportunity and preparedness. But during that same time, when I was in my junior year, I wasn't quite sure what I wanted to do. Political science was interesting to me. I thought, well, maybe I'll go into legal work, maybe be a lawyer. So I was what they would call on the pre-law track. I was in a moot court honors class and everything like that. And my junior year, I met a friend who, at the time, he was an intern in President Reagan's office in Los Angeles. This being in the 90s after President Reagan was out of office already. And he said, I'm graduating. He was a senior. He was a grade ahead of me in a different school. And he said, they asked if we had anyone in mind to take over our internship. And he said, I know you'd appreciate it. So he said, it doesn't pay anything, but you get to be in Century City on the 34th floor, which is the Nakatomi Plaza, which is where they filmed Die Hard, as well as where Ronald Reagan's office was on the top floor. I said, absolutely, that sounds like a wonderful opportunity. So I started working there as an intern. When I graduated school, I was lucky enough. They said, we don't want you to go. We'd love you to stay. Can we offer you a job? And will that keep you around? And honestly, they didn't have to give me any money. Just the fact that they still wanted me around was good enough. But it was nice to get paid for basically living a dream of getting to walk in the office and say, good morning, Mr. President. Few people get that honor, and I was proud to have it. So so worked at President Reagan's office for a number of years until about 2000. And then while working there, I got to meet a lot of great folks from his administration, famous folks, famous in that world, like Mike Deaver and some other folks, advisor to the president, and got to meet different senators and former presidents, as you'd imagine. And George H.W. Bush was a regular visitor, and got to know him a little bit, and really got the bug to come to D.C. and do something, whatever that was. Still didn't know what that might be.
Sure.
But an opportunity came along in 2000 to join the George W. Bush campaign, and I reluctantly left the office of Ronald Reagan to go work for George W. Bush for a time. And then I was appointed in the Bush administration and stayed there I was lucky enough to be part of the inauguration, and then went in on the first day of the administration, part of what they call the transition team, and stayed there the entire time. I basically turned the lights on in my office at USDA and turned them off 8 years later. Yeah.
So Steve, you went from working in LA while it's in politics to DC. Is this your first exposure to DC at this point? And if so, what is that like?
It was in that way. I mean, my only other exposure to it was, I remember a trip when I graduated. I think it was when I graduated 6th grade. My parents took us on a vacation, and DC was one of them. DC was one of the places we went to, and I remember seeing all the people in suits and thinking everybody's important in DC. This is like I'm like 12 years old, I think, and
Yeah.
I just thought
You
everybody
you
in
and I
DC.
may have been you and I may have been there at the same time. I took a similar
Yeah.
trip. Yeah.
Yeah, and I remember just seeing everyone in suits and thought everybody must be doing something really important because a bunch of people in suits, and I want to be important like that and be an important person one day and wear a suit to work in Washington D.C. And I used to wear a suit to Washington D.C., not knowing how hot it gets in D.C. wearing a suit,
Yeah.
but being a California kid from near the ocean, I mean, that humidity was a killer that first summer. But anyway, yeah, that was my first exposure as far as firsthand being involved in the policymaking process, in really understanding how the branches of government work together, primarily the legislative and executive branches, and how in a general framing, it is just like you read in the book, read in your books in school, but at the same time, in reality, how the practical application of it is far different than described in a lot of the stories we've been told. So what you see on TV also is not how it works.
Well, yeah, that's rarely the case in my
Yeah.
experience. But yeah. Yeah. So you build a career in DC. You start there and then you build a career. And it seems like your stops have all been about public issues, public awareness, and advocacy. Is that correct? And if so, talk about some of those stops and how they've led you to where you are today.
Certainly. Yeah, where I was lucky enough to be appointed to a part of U.S. Department of Agriculture that is the least. It's fairly bipartisan. So it's food assistance, commodity support. It was a division. It's a division that was called the Food, Nutrition, and Consumer Services. It's where school lunch and food stamp, all the nutrition assistance programs are, as well as the food distribution programs and the commodity support programs. So really, my time with dealing with Congress is both sides agreeing that these were the right things to do. The disagreements were usually on about how much money is going to be spent doing it. So
Sure.
the first step is of should we be doing this? That part's done. It's just the argument. Then it just becomes the negotiation back and forth of how much and who's going to do it, which made my job a little bit easier and I guess less controversial. But at the same time, there's pressures from other places to cut and move things around. And we were proposing cutting entire programs at one point, just when things were getting a little rough, budgetary wise, and balance, trying to balance budgets and so forth. It really teaches you to deal with a lot of sometimes competing interests, as much as there may be bipartisan support. There were many times where the White House wanted one thing, but our authorizing committees and our appropriating committees wanted very different things, and you sometimes get stuck in the middle as the senior administrator of the program.
Sure.
So being able to understand where everything else is and find the right middle ground, but then also understanding where the purpose and the role of the policy is. And being able to identify that and understand that is not something you're taught in school. That's something you learn on the job. And luckily, I had some very thoughtful folks, mostly career staff who had been there for a long time, who really helped me in understanding how to identify those and see those things. And those types of skills have been very valuable in the work we're doing now at the Battery Coalition, because there are policies flying out fast and furious from Washington, D.C. right now, from funding opportunities, from requests for information. The government's constantly looking for guidance right now on what to do with battery materials, how our batteries going to be moving throughout the economy. How can we support U.S. production? It's building U.S. competitiveness. We did a lot of that with agriculture, right? Because when I came into USDA, it was 2001. We were still feeling the pain, believe it or not, from the agriculture policies of the 70s and 80s that really put some of U.S. grain exports and dairy products at a disadvantage. So some of that actually followed me into my private sector career when I went between the Bush administration and and the Responsible Battery Coalition, there was a time between that where I was working at a public relations firm called Burson Marsteller, and actually some of that followed me into that when it started. Dairy. The dairy industry was a client, as well as some other chemical and um, different manufacturing industries were clients as well, including the Responsible Battery Coalition was actually my client at the firm. That's how it became part of the RBC, because it was I really like that. I want to do that. And they said, well, yeah, come on, let's do it. So that's how I ended up leaving the PR firm. But to just back up a little bit, just really we're seeing a lot of policy changes, a lot of policy proposals, and understanding where your industry might be or where your organization can play a role in either supporting that or help guide that policy, has been something that I've relied on a great deal in how we as a coalition, what types of positions or how we might insert ourselves into a process, or what types of research we may need to commission that allows the industry to better manage, these policies, or what might the outcomes be from what the policies are.
Yeah, so that baptism by fire, well, it might not have been comfortable at the time, is serving you well today. When I think about the work that the coalition does, and we've had the opportunity to do some work at Asher with your organization. One of the things that's always intrigued me is you're dealing with things that are very much here and now, but you're also planning for the future. So I want to talk a little bit about that. But before we dive in there, if you could just explain for those who may be unfamiliar with the Responsible Battery Coalition, what does the organization do? What's your mission?
Yeah, so it's a coalition, and we use that term very deliberately. A lot of times we have in industry associations, they represent a certain sector of an industry. They may be on one end of the value chain, somewhere in the middle. What we wanted to do when we set up the Responsible Battery Coalition is we wanted to make it an organization that represents, as much as possible, the entire life cycle of a battery. So we have manufacturers like our founding member, Clarios, which was then called Johnson Controls. They are the largest battery manufacturer in the world. 1/3 of the vehicles in the world have a Clarios battery in them. They're leaders in the industry for what they do, both with their work on sustainability, as well as just creating a product and being able to recycle it and really perfect the closed loop recycling system that really all batteries are being modeled after. And then we have retailers like Advance Auto Parts, O'Reilly, AutoZone, and then large fleets like FedEx. And then moving into the original equipment, the manufacturers, OEMs, Ford, Honda North America. And then we have recyclers like Li-Cycle is a large lithium-ion recycler headquartered in Canada, but they operate quite a bit just throughout North America. So there's no other place where those types of companies, where you would not have the Advance Auto Parts, FedEx, Clarios, and Ford are not going to sit at the same table and talk about, reshaping the value chain of the next generation of batteries anywhere else but the Responsible Battery Coalition. So, and we knew that would never happen unless there was a coalition to make it happen. So we became that platform for it.
So Steve, what are some of the priorities, some of the goals as you bring all these stakeholders to the table? What are some of the things you're trying to accomplish?
Our mission is really to define and put into practice the best practices for managing a battery throughout its life cycle, regardless of its chemistry. So although a lot of lead acid is still the dominant battery chemistry, that's what low voltage that starts your car every day.
Hopefully it does. Yeah.
Yeah. Onto the next generation, a lot of the hybrid cars, they use nickel metal hydride, and then lithium ion is the preferred, what they call the traction battery for electric vehicles. But I will tell you this, lead acid batteries are still in electric vehicles as well. What operate a lot of those safety systems, allows the headlights to turn on and off, the doors to unlock, and runs the screen in front of you. Those are a lot. In many cases, are run by 12-volt lead acid batteries, because it's a reliable, low-cost technology that is sustainable and widely available. And you can You can get it just next door in Wisconsin from Clarios, or from East Penn in Pennsylvania. You don't have to get an overseas contract to get it. So, but really, that's our mission, is to define the best practices for managing the battery throughout its life cycle, and that dictates what we do. And we operate somewhat of a hybrid as a trade association, a think tank, and a bit of a PR agency for our members. And in that industry association, really the industry is first. The commercial interests of the industry are a priority of ours. Like a think tank, we look at where we can make investments in novel research with our academic partners at the University of Michigan, Arizona State University, and look at, what are the types of investments we need to make to create the tools to do the research that are going to be useful to the industry or to policymakers as we advance forward. And like you said, very forward looking. We're thinking 10, 15 years in advance from now. We're looking at 2035, when we're going to have about 1 million EV batteries come out of commission and need to be managed. Right now, the infrastructure to manage them properly in a circular system, meaning that all materials were reclaimed and put into a new use in batteries, does not exist. So that still needs to be built. We'll get there. And then as PR agency, we are we're avid communicators for our members and for the work that we're doing as an organization. So, and that's been great to have Asher as a partner, even at our very early days in 2017 when we first launched. Mike Fulton in your DC office has been with us ever since. He's still with us. He's been a tremendous asset to us, both in our work in primarily in DC, but also when we launched the coalition to begin with in April of 2017, all the way up to the work we're doing now in funding programs we're advocating for funding for program for USAID. Mike's been an integral part of that, and it's been a great partner.
Yeah, well, I'm not surprised to hear that Mike Fulton's played a critical role. He's one of our best assets. So tell me, what are some of the priorities you're focused on? You obviously have a lot on your plate and thinking years into the future. But in the near term, what are some of the things that are at the top of your to-do list that are taking up the majority of your time? Maybe they're exciting to you and the coalition. Maybe they're a little intimidating, keeping you up at night. Maybe they're a combination. But what are some of the things that are taking up your time right now?
Yeah, really, I'll work backwards a little bit from the analogy I just gave. From the PR side, I think we're trying to demystify the electric vehicle for the public and for policymakers, and really be a reasoned and a strong voice for, not necessarily for that EVs are the only way or anything like that. It's just that we just completed and published. Well, we supported it. Obviously, we collaborated with our partners at the University of Michigan. We published a peer-reviewed paper. Well, they published it. We funded it. On the cost of ownership of an electric vehicle, and looking at where the cost of ownership of internal combustion, hybrid, and fully electric, where you meet parity in cost savings, right? Because we all know there's a premium on EVs, and we looked at, well, how long does it take for a hybrid? How long do you have to own and use a hybrid to reach cost parity with an internal combustion versus an EV? We found, not surprisingly, that it takes just a few years, 4 to 5 years, depending on price point and so forth, for a hybrid to reach price parity with an internal combustion. It takes a little bit longer for a fully electric EV, given the prices. But
sure,
we're seeing those that's starting to level out now with incentives, with cost of materials, and as the life cycle around a battery becomes more circular, again, meaning that all the materials of the battery come back into being made, or the majority of them, I should say, are made into new batteries, the cost of the battery will continue to come down. And that's the other thing that our biggest priority is, what do we need to do to advance a fully circular economy for the next generation of batteries, again, regardless of their chemistry. And that's the big priority right now, is how do we get to that place?
Sure.
So we're actually working on a project right now that we'll be announcing soon. That is essentially a systematic approach for evaluating the circularity of the North American rather, preparedness, if you will, for circularity. And then how far, basically where we need to make further investments and what areas do we need to make a priority to create more circularity, and advance towards that. Because if we don't have circularity, we're going to be stuck in the same situation we're now, which isn't necessarily bad. The industry is advancing incredibly fast, and like I said, I don't doubt the innovation of the industry. I just think for us to get there, as an organization, we feel that there needs to be a unifying voice within the industry of how we're going to do it.
Sure.
I think if we start getting too far ahead of ourselves, making claims and so forth, we actually become more of a liability. So that's what I'm talking about when we want to make some demystifying of the EVs. I think with that demystifying comes along, okay, well, these are the types of things that we need to be advancing on. This is where we need to be making investments in research. These are the areas that we need to be understanding. And then we think about it in the industry context of, okay, we also keep in mind that these need to be commercially viable. We can't just say, well, by 2050, we're going to be fully circular.
Yeah.
That's a great aspiration. How are you going to do that?
Yeah.
So,
yeah. A little bit easier said than done. So,
yeah.
you mentioned that, one of the goals is demystifying EVs. Why do you think they are such a mystery? Is it simply because they're comparatively rare in terms of people's experience with them? Is that why they're a little bit of a mystery? Is there more to it than that?
I think that plays a big part in it. It's just there's something new. I don't think, honestly, I don't think these certain mandates or the talk of mandates or the misinterpretation of mandates of EVs helps. It actually, I think human nature is just to resist something that you're being ordered to do.
Sure, sure. I have personal experience with that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in the case of like the government ordering us to do things, I guess that would be a very American thing, is what my European friends would tell me. We're part of the Responsible Battery Coalition is part of what's called the Global Battery Alliance, which is an organization that's headquartered in Brussels, and has a very heavy European contingent, as you can imagine, but it's global. But it is interesting when we talk about mandates and so forth. It's usually the Americans in that meeting going, no, that's not going to work. That sense of rebellion is still deep in our culture, and I think if the government continues to move with saying, well, we're not going to sell internal combustions in our state, after 2030, the resistance to it, like I said, it's not helping EV adoption. And I also think that the false perception that EVs are for everyone, no matter what, right now is somehow there's this perception that that's being told to that's being marketed to people. And honestly, I don't see it. I mean, EVs aren't for everyone. I mean, they don't fit every lifestyle right now. And I don't know of any evidence of any of the EV makers telling anyone that. I don't. I'm still waiting for that commercial from Ford telling you that you should never buy their other internal combustion vehicles. You should only buy the electric ones. Anyway, but so I think that breeds a lot of mystery, a lot of resistance, and so forth. I think I had an interesting conversation just anecdotally with a friend not too long ago, who was asking me, about, I have very old cars. I love cars. I'm a car guy. I come from Southern California, grew up in the car culture. I've always had some sort of hot rod that's just, causing me problems and anyway, but a lot of fun nevertheless. And he was asking me just about electric vehicles and so forth. And we were just, talking, we were just striking up a conversation about that. And he said that he recently rented a Tesla, and he could not get over just how well that car drove and just how fun it was to drive this electric car. Not sure if he would buy one quite yet,
Yeah.
but he felt that he could get himself in a lot of trouble with it, speed wise.
Yeah. Yeah. Which is not the first thing you usually hear about with EVs. Yeah.
Yeah, and just how well the car drove, and just it was, I can't remember what it was, but it was just whatever the rental car companies have. I think it's
Yeah.
it's the Type S, I think is what it is. I'm not sure, that whatever the Type 3,
Yeah.
maybe it's the lower end one. That's the, the kind of pedestrian grade commuter car.
Sure.
And he said that thing drove as good as any Porsche he's ever owned.
Terrific. Yeah. Yeah. So Steve, a big part of your job is navigating competing priorities, if you will. You've got diverse stakeholders. They're all trying to do the right thing collectively, but they also have individual and unique interests. You've got some experience from your past career stops in navigating that. But how do you manage some of that? What are you doing with your team to make sure that each of your stakeholders' voices are heard, but collectively as a coalition, you're moving the industry forward, even when there are those competing priorities?
Yeah, we've been very fortunate. Yet in our membership, given how diverse it is, um, we have yet to have an issue where, well, and I think this comes from our highly collaborative nature too, and just the fact that our members, our members, we do have great members, and we have great representatives from the different brands. And what's been so helpful is, although they're not viewing the RBC as, like, so not like a trade association where you're looking at it as, okay, I'm going to get this many business deals out of this membership.
Yeah.
Or I'm going to have this many customers if I join the coalition. That happens. There's a lot of collaboration that goes on. In fact, between Advance Auto Parts and Clarios, their collaboration, as using the RBC, is, the RBC brought them together in that way. But Advanced Auto Parts has now the first UL certified circular battery. And a lot of that came about because they worked together in the RBC. Now, other batteries can get that certification too, but they did the hard work together and created that. So anyway, all that is to say, really the priority being that it's all for advancing sustainability around batteries, the ones we have now and the ones we don't even know we're going to get yet. As long as we stay true to that, I think everyone just agrees that the work that we're doing advances towards that. Even though we're talking about demystifying an EV and talking about cost of ownership, we're talking about it in the sense of its not only cost, but then also its impact in the environment. And we're looking at in the context of GHG emissions, which you might think, well, we'll just keep using Advanced Auto Parts as an example. Well, why does Advanced care about that? They don't sell EVs. they don't make them either. But they use them. Advanced Auto Parts has and they sell parts for it. They sell.
Yeah, well, my first thought is it opens up new product lines for them to sell, and it's not like the old product lines are going to disappear overnight. So it's the potential for meeting consumers where they are and generating some additional revenue.
Yeah, and EVs are the future of automotive retail in a lot of ways.
Yeah.
And they still have moving parts that wear out. I mean, they still have steering components, brakes, everything, all that stuff wears out, and you're gonna have to buy it somewhere. I mean, while your car's under warranty, and the dealership can do that stuff, but we're gonna advance into an area to where, you're gonna be buying those parts over the counter. And then also they have their own fleets that they're electrifying as well. So owning the cost of owning an electric vehicle is something that is of interest to them. So I mean, I'd say so far we're always cognizant of what our members' needs are, and and we try to stay true to those. And I think as far as having competing interests, it's really the point of entry into the Responsible Battery Coalition is the fact that we're just advancing the battery. It's not necessarily advancing sustainable battery practices. We're not looking at it as some sort of exchange of membership versus equals sales or customers or anything like that.
Sure. Well, and I would assume that your members see that there's ample opportunity that's going to require cooperation, and that's where the coalition comes in. And the challenges they might face, that you're there to help them. And if they are able to navigate that, they're going
Yeah.
to be on the leading edge of all this.
Yeah.
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 Well, Steve, I want to pivot to a few more quick hit questions. These can be as expansive or as short as you want. I call them quick hit questions, but they really are, they rarely are. I'd like to hear a little bit about your best career advice. You've done some amazing things. You've worked with some of the most well-known names in the country. What is your best career advice? If you were speaking to someone who's maybe just starting out, what would you encourage them to focus on if they want to build a successful and fulfilling career?
Um, Gosh, that's a that's a I would say never immediately say no to an opportunity. Um, Obviously, unless it's completely just ridiculous. I mean,
Yeah.
just don't say no to things. I mean, there's been a couple times in my career to where things have come my way to where my initial my initial compulsion, I guess, would have been to say no, and I'm glad that I didn't. At first, it didn't sound too good,
Yeah.
and then once I thought about it, explored it a little bit more, I realized, no, wait, this is really good.
Yeah.
So um, that would I think just don't be so fast to say no to
Yeah.
something.
Well, I think some of it, and you alluded to this earlier, is naturally we have a resistance to change, and sometimes it seems easier to keep doing what you're doing instead of trying something new. But that's where a lot of the growth is. So, sounds like you've experienced that firsthand. This is another one you've alluded to a little bit, but I'd like to hear a little more. If you could clear up one myth or misconception about the industry you're in, could be about the coalition itself, or maybe it's amplify something that's not understood well enough. What would that be?
I mean, for the industry itself, I think again it goes back to this idea that electric vehicles are somehow, or just batteries in general, are somehow some sort of environmental risk. Um, with proper management, they're not. And there's the industry is at an inflection point in a lot of ways to where there's there's a great deal of innovation going on right now with battery technology, and and a lot of there's definitely antagonists out there that say, well, it takes whatever, they'll come up with some,
Yeah,
it's the carbon footprint or the GHG,
yeah.
greenhouse
There's
gas
always a
footprint.
ratio of why it's
Yeah, yeah. And
yeah,
it's it's yes, you know what? It's no one is hiding the fact that if you have them sitting on the dealer lot on their first day of life, a fully electric vehicle, it has more emissions associated with it than the internal combustion engine. However, that that imbalance disappears very quickly. I mean, it all depends on how many miles you drive, and there are some other factors. Um, but you quickly balance that out. So just that seems to be a repeated kind of falsehood that a lot of folks will say. It's like, well, just admit it. Fine, you don't want an EV. Okay, great. Buy the gasoline one that's sitting right next to it on the lot. It's
yeah,
just
yeah. As you said, it's not for everyone, but you certainly want to make the decision with the right information, not something that has been repeated, but not necessarily grounded in reality.
yeah. But I mean, we're already seeing, if you look at, Amazon, FedEx, they're all advancing very quickly in large fleet. I think where we're seeing a lot of the EV adoption is in the large fleets, and that's a good thing because it's very controlled, and they can, like the work that FedEx is doing, they are basically creating their own infrastructure with their own charging, their own system to where um, The batteries are coming into the vehicles are coming into their fleet, and they're going out of their fleet, and they're managing all that very closely. And it's a great way to understand the best ways to manage those all those factors around the battery, rather than just sending it out into the public and see what happens.
Yeah, yeah. So when there is wider adoption, there's sort of test cases out there that can help us understand
Yeah.
what we need to do. Yeah, that's great. Okay. One last question for you, and I'm going to give you an out here if this is a tough question for you to answer. So I typically ask people, what is their favorite tip or trick or tool or hack, call it what you will, that they use in their work, something that helps them get the job done? And you can absolutely answer that. But if you don't like that question, tell us what your favorite car is, since you're a car guy, and why you love it. So I'll give you a choice there to get you out of that potentially difficult question.
I would say, on the first, on the work thing, the biggest thing that I would say is, well, two things. First of all, it's just work.
Yeah.
It is, this, there, I am seeing, I can say it now because I'm over 50, the younger crowd, there is this idea that you need to work three jobs and all this stuff. Some people just have to. And it's unfortunate, but there are these young kids who they seem to. It's almost like they want to be working all the time, and I guess that's a good thing. I'm not sure if that's essentially the right thing to be doing.
It's not sustainable, that's for sure. But yeah, it's nice to have ambition, but a little moderation in all things is good too.
Yeah, and I just experienced that in these kids. I've seen them, when I was at the public relations firm, and then now on the outside is, I've seen a lot of kids really burn fast and bright, and they end up burning out. It's a little tough to watch, and they end up not being able to perform well. Because they're just wearing themselves out. Sorry to bring you down on that question, but it's just something I see.
I think it's an important message. I needed that at about 6:30 this morning when a client called me with a crisis. I needed to remember that we'll get through this, and it's just work. So I appreciate the reminder myself.
And working at one of the elite firms, as they call it. And I was in the issues and crisis group there too. So I and because of my background in politics, policy, and public health science, and basically if it leaked, blew up, caught fire, I was usually brought in on it. It's important to have that balance, and just to understand where sometimes that email can wait. You do. Yeah.
Well, I always tell my younger coworkers, sometimes they listen, that communication tools that allow for immediate response don't always require an immediate response. We have gotten so used to, and again, it's a good thing when people want to be responsive, but in fear of missing out on information, we're missing out on some of the stuff that really matters. So I think it's an important message. Yeah. All right. You have any lighter fare for that question?
Well, I answered the second question. The favorite car is a 69 Dodge Charger. For sure.
All right.
That is it.
Okay.
And the reason is Dukes of Hazzard. I grew up watching Dukes of Hazzard. I thought they were the coolest. There was a time where I did diverge from that when I started, when Smoking the Bandit came out, and I really liked that Trans Am, a black Trans Am. But then once I learned a little, as I got a little bit older, I learned how slow that car really is in real life. And that was made in a very dark ages of muscle cars, if you will.
Another reminder that you can't believe everything you see in the movies, right?
Yeah. There was no way that car's outrunning police officers.
All right. Well, if you take your Charger over any jumps, we'd like to see the video footage of that. So.
No.
Or even if you just jump in the window without opening the door, we'd like to see. That's more of a Starsky and Hutch move, though. So.
Yeah. Well, they jumped in the windows all the time, slid across the hood, all that type of stuff. I obey all speed laws, Anthony. I do nothing. over the speed limit.
You remembered that we were recording, so good job.
Yes.
Yeah. Well, Steve, I really appreciate it. This has been great. Really appreciate the work that the coalition does, and thanks for working with us at Asher. Really appreciate your time this afternoon.
All right. Thank you, Anthony.
Yep. And thanks to everyone who took the opportunity to listen to this episode of the Asher Marketing Podcast. We'll be back next time with another great guest, and we hope you'll join us back.